Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com. Today we're in round 3 of our coverage of the 2016 Tata Steel Tournament. Yesterday we had a pretty epic match between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen, two of the titans in the game. If you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you check it out. Some really awesome chess. But today's match may be one of the most anticipated chess matches in a very long time. White's going to be played by none other than 16-year-old Chinese Grandmaster Yi Wei. Now, if you're not too familiar with Yi Wei, when he was 13, he was the 4th youngest Grandmaster ever. Two of the players younger than him to become Grandmaster are in this tournament. One is Sergei Karyakin, the other is Magnus Carlsen, his opponent today. And Magnus Carlsen, as Yi said, is his favorite player. So he gets to play the world champion, his favorite player. And many players are saying that Yi has the potential to surpass Magnus Carlsen in the game. Now, a little bit on Yi. The Tata Steel Tournament every year has 2 different divisions. You have the Masters group, which is what we're covering right now. You have 14 of some of the top players in the world. But you also have a Challenger group. These are players that are extremely talented, but they're not quite at that master level. The winner of that Challenger group every year gets to play in the Masters event next year. So Yi won the Challenger group last year. That's why he gets to play in the Masters group this year. But he has just been dominating the field. In March of 2015, he became the youngest player ever to have a rating of 2,700. And in May of last year, he also became the youngest Chinese chess champion ever. So he is dominating the field. Every chess tournament he plays, he is impressing everyone. And Magnus Carlsen's been asked about Yi for a few years now, saying, you know, this kid, he's kind of doing everything you did along the same timeline, just a few months older than Magnus Carlsen when he became a Grandmaster. And Magnus Carlsen, all he wants to do is he wants to be the champion. He said that he wants to be a champion for a very long time, and he recognizes that this kid is kind of the future of chess, and he needs to make sure that he establishes himself to this kid playing here, that he's kind of the best. So that's kind of the dynamic that you have going on in this game. So without further ado, we're going to get into one of the most anticipated chess matches of the year. So we'll go ahead and get into the game. Yi starts out with pawn to e4. Always like a player that wants to be pretty aggressive against the world champion. Magnus Carlsen plays pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop here to b5, getting into the Ruy Lopez line. Pawn here to a6, kicking the bishop back. Knight here to f6, castle on the king side, bishop here to e7, a rook over here to e1, and then pawn here to b5. Pretty interesting because Magnus Carlsen usually plays the Berlin defense. For the past 2 years, I think that's kind of been his main go-to for Black's defense here. But decides to go for something a little bit different. Castle on the king side here. And White has a few options as far as how he wants to continue. This is getting into the Marshall attack. It's a very sharp line from Black, gambiting one of its pawns to have a very strong attack. A lot of players, even Garry Kasparov, one of the greatest chess players of all time, for White, usually tries to play the anti-Marshall attack lines because the theory is just so deep. You can get into a lot of trouble as White. And so the anti-decline lines are usually something, pawn here to a4, try to break things up, knight here to c3. Those are some of the most popular. The just going down the Marshall attack lines would be pawn here to c3. So in this particular moment, we have Yi kind of has a decision to make. Do we want to kind of make it a little bit easier on ourselves and play the anti-Marshall attack, or do we just want to go all in and let Magnus Carlsen play one of the sharpest lines as Black and just see how we fare against the world champion? This 16-year-old decided to go with that, and he plays pawn here to c3, and so Magnus Carlsen plays pawn here to d5. The Marshall attack, very, very strong, sharp line from Magnus Carlsen. It's really just all theory from here. This has been analyzed for many, many, many years, and it's really tough to see how, even though White's up upon a material, how he really gains a strong advantage here. Black just has a huge attack that he can start to employ. So we do see an exchange on board, pawn here to d5, knight takes here on e5. After the exchange, rook up here to e5, and then pawn here to c6. Now, back in the day, it was kind of thought to play knight to f6. This was later improved to play pawn here to c6, keeping the knight in the center of the board. And now pawn here to d3. And White has 2 different options. You could play pawn here to d3, or you could also just play pawn here to d4. Both are completely okay. Decides to go ahead and play pawn here to d3, opening up the board for his dark dark square bishop to get involved. Right now, this pawn on c3 is not doing too much. It's just kind of blocking the knight, getting ready to get involved into the game. If we look on both sides of the board, Magnus Carlsen wants to throw everything at the king side of white. Eway no longer has any protection over here on the king side, so that's where a lot of the attack happens for Magnus Carlsen. On the opposite side, white really has to do two things. One, he needs to protect himself on the king side. He can't get overwhelmed. But then later he wants to start to open up on the queen side. Black's a little bit more extended with his pawns right here. So maybe kind of get behind enemy lines, start to chip away on some of these weaknesses here, and just see what white can do in this game. We see a bishop here to d6, centralizing that bishop. Rook down here to e1. Bishop here to f5. So Magnus Carlsen doing a really good job of getting his pieces involved into the action, both of his bishops in the center of the board. Queen over here to f3. As we kind of talked about, white needs to make sure he protects the queen or the king side of the board. Now queen over here to h4. Starting the attack here, we have the bishop right here on d6. Protecting this pawn here on h2. So a few different options on how white could continue. He could play pawn here to g3, kind of stopping this attack. Or he could just say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take here on f5. This is probably a little bit easy for me to deal with after the queen takes here on h2. King over here to f1. Queen down here to h1 check. The king moves, get the rook involved into the game. Bishop up here, e3, stopping that. We could see the knight take here after the queen's captured. The queen's captured. And this is going to be fine for white. We start to see some material come off the board. Both sides are now even in material. This is kind of the easy way out for Eway, and there's a lot of these in the game that he has the opportunity to take. And he says, you know what, I don't want to trade off my pieces. I feel pretty confident even against the world champion. So instead, I'm just going to stop the attack, play pawn here to g3. I'm going to hold on to my material, and I'm going to keep my kings tucked in nicely here on g1. So the queen comes down here to h3, and then we see bishop here to e3. Needs to get this dark square bishop involved into the game. Now the knight can get involved into the game, but nice central square for this bishop here on e3. Magnus Carlsen decides to go ahead and take here on d3, and white again has a couple options. He could go ahead and take with his bishop here on d5. After the pawn takes, the queen could come up here, capture on d5, attacking both bishops right here. We can see the rook swing over here. This is going to be completely fine if he wants to play this. Instead, he decides to go a different route, and he plays after bishop to d3. He just says, hey, knight to d2. I'm going to give up that pawn material. We'll go even on material-wise. I'm just going to continue developing my pieces. I like my board state, and I just want to see what Magnus Carlsen can throw at me. So Magnus Carlsen continues with queen up here to f5, now bishop to d4, just getting a little bit better position for this bishop right here. And then we see the rook over here to e8, trying to gain control of this long file right here. And then king up here to g2, wants to make sure that there's no shenanigans back here on the back rank. Also wants to make sure he protects this queen. Doesn't have to have his knight here on d2 protecting it as well. So doing as much as he can to stay protected, but also controlling his powerful pieces. Magnus Carlsen now decides to go ahead and take with his queen here on f3. The king captures. Rook down here to e6, getting ready to bring his other rook over here to e8, kind of that double barrel. We see the rook over here to c1, just getting a little bit more involved into the game, especially if he wants to start pushing up with his pawn. He does have his knight protecting that square as well, and his bishop here on b3. Pawn here to h6. King back here to g2, just getting a little more king safety. He just want to protect the square right here from the queen, but after that he doesn't want to have to worry about anything with the bishops getting involved, the rooks getting involved, anything like that. As soon as the king comes back, Magnus Carlsen quickly played a rook over here to g6, starting to attack, put a lot of pressure on this g3 square. Knight to e4, just centralizing that knight, and then the knight comes over here to f4. As you can probably see, the pawn can't take here on f4 because it is being pinned down by this rook here on g6. So instead we see the king come up here to f3, and both sides can really start to get their kings involved into the game. Yes, there's still tons of material. Both sides have 3 minor pieces and 2 rooks, but as long as the queen's not on the board, it's very difficult for one side to really swarm the opponent's king unless they just don't have any minor pieces or major pieces themselves. So a king up here to f3, getting a lot more involved into the game, protecting this knight here on e4 is completely fine. Bishop takes here. The rook takes up here, and now the king's protecting it as well. Knight down here to d3, attacking both this pawn here on b2 and this rook here on c1. Rook over here to d1, and now knight taking here on b2. Rook up here to d2. So as we kind of look at material-wise, Magnus Carlsen has done a really good job. He was down a pawn in material, and now he's up a pawn in material. So kind of fought his way back. Magnus Carlsen, really strong player. As we all know, he is the world champion. So a really good position right here. It's very tough to see how he can get this into a victory. White does have the double bishop pair. It is an open board state, so double bishop pair is going to be much better than maybe a bishop and a knight going into the end game. So while Magnus Carlsen has a slight edge just in material wise, White definitely has enough to counterattack and have some sort of attack if either side were to blunder in this position. We see Magnus Carlsen bring his bishop down here to a3, just holding on to this knight. This knight can't go anywhere right now. You have d3 square kind of blocked off. You have this square here on c4 kind of blocked off a little bit by this bishop right here. So just bringing it down and protect it a little bit. We see the bishop come up here to b6. Then we see the rook swing over here. We see capture. Now the bishop captures. And this is going to be fine because once this rook from the d file escapes, now it's a little bit easier. The knight can come here to d3 and escape. Doesn't have to worry about his bishop. Dark square bishop kind of protecting that as well. A rook over here to a d2. So attacking both this knight and also attacking this bishop kind of behind it. Black's kind of forced to come here to e5. Check. And then after check, we can see the bishop move if he wants to. Bishop comes back here to e7. The rook can't swing over here. We really like to play rook over here to d8, but Yi does a nice little job of having his bishop here on b6, stopping the rook coming to the most logical square, and that is the d file, which Yi is kind of holding down with his rook right now. So pawn up here to f4. Forcing the knight to move. Knight comes back here to c4. After the capture right here, we do see a double pawn right here. So even though Magnus Carlsen is up a pawn, having the double pawns right here on the c file is probably not the best right here. Yi brings his rook up here to the 7th rank. As you've probably seen from many of my videos, you always want to get your rook to the 7th rank if you're white. If you're black, you want to bring it down here to the 2nd rank. You can just get behind your opponent's pieces, start to gobble up some of the pawns right here. Also put a lot of pressure on your opponent's king. He can't really come past the 7th rank unless he kind of dances around these pawns. So a really nice square for Yi and his rook here on d7. Bishop here to f7. F6, attacking the pawn right here. Rook over here. Yi says, okay, you can go ahead and take that. I'm going to go ahead and take yours. But Magnus Carlsen now has a passed pawn here on c4. It's good and bad. The good news is he has a passed pawn, and so he's going to look to push that pawn. That's his plan A, B, and C. The problem is that his opponent has a dark square bishop, and this pawn would actually promote to a dark square. And this is something that even in your own games you should look at. If your passed pawn is going to promote to a square where your opponent can't stop it with a bishop, that is significantly stronger than if your opponent could actually stop it with his bishop, because they could just hang out all day long if they wanted to. Just wait till you promote and just take that no harm, no foul for them. So it's not as big of an advantage as it probably looks, but Magnus Carlsen definitely wants to be pushing this pawn as much as possible. Magnus Carlsen plays rook over here to b8, attacking the bishop there on a b6. Pawn up here to a4, starting to push. Bishop over here to b2. Bishop here to a5. Pretty interesting. Decides to go ahead and give up his pawn here on c3. After the bishop takes, the bishop recaptures, and then the rook takes here. So both sides are equal in material going into the rook endgame. Completely even right now. No side is up at all. Definitely kind of looks like a drawish game, but really just decide if anyone's going to make a mistake or how this kind of goes from here. So rook down here to b4, attacking the pawn. Pawn comes up here to a5, and that's fine. Rook here to b5, and then swinging the rook over here to a3, protecting that. And then you just kind of see a little bit of dancing. Rook down here to b2, just forcing the king to move. Pawn here to f5, kind of improving position. Rook over here to c3, and I thought this was somewhat interesting. there's just nowhere for this rook to really go. But he plays, rook here to c3, a rook here to b5, rook back here to a3, holding on to that pawn. Then we start to see some action on the king side. Magnus Carlsen sees kind of a weakness that he can start to attack on the king side, so he starts to push forward. Pawn here to g5, after the take right here, king back here to g2. Now, Magnus Carlsen finally gets his king involved into the game. Pawn here to h4 and pawn to g4. And this is somewhat interesting for Magnus Carlsen because now White has a passed pawn, a protected passed pawn that he can start to push forward, and this is now a threat that Eway has. Now, it would take a lot to actually push this all the way up the board, but it definitely still represents a threat on board that he has. Now we see rook over here to c4, which is interesting that he decides to go ahead and give up this pawn on a5. I probably would have played rook here to a4. Makes a lot of sense. Just keep it on board. He could have always played king here to f2 if he wanted to. That looks fine to me as well. But decides to go and play rook here to c3. Now the rook takes here on a5. Rook up here to c6. Rook down here, forcing the king to move. Now pawn here to a5. And then rook over here to a6. But this is kind of where Eway wants to have his rook for the rest of the game if he can. It forces this pawn right here. It can't really do anything. As soon as this rook were to move, he could just take this pawn. Doesn't really matter where it is on the A rank. This king right here can never come back to 6th ranks. It's completely blocked off by this rook. And if he wants to, he can even start to push forward with this pawn here on the H file. So Eway, although he's down in material, he really likes his position, not necessarily for the win, but he recognizes that Magnus Carlsen really can't do anything in this position. From here, Magnus Carlsen says, hey, okay, I have a passed pawn. There's nothing else I can really do here, so I'm going to go ahead and push that pawn. King here to h1, king here to f7. King kind of moves around a little bit. We do see some twofold repetition. Then all of a sudden we see the king move here to e7. Doesn't want to have the threefold repetition yet. King here to h1. A3, and then king here to G1. And in this particular case, Magnus Carlsen decides, okay, I'm going to go ahead and extend my hand for the draw. There's just no way, even though he's up a pawn in material, there's no way he can actually win this game. Eway's just going to keep his king over here. He's not even going to worry about his pawn pushing forward. And as we said before, as soon as this rook moves, this pawn's going to fall. His king can get involved. Nothing good is really going to come from this. Just a lot of time wasted if they continue to move on. So both players shake hands, a drawn game. Really exciting, though. We don't see a lot of Eway. I haven't covered a lot of his matches before. So to see the 16-year-old kid play against Magnus Carlsen, his hero, who he said is the best chess player in the world, he played extremely well. He didn't shy away from one of the sharpest lines in the Lopez, the Marshall attack. There was a few opportunities where he could have easily taken the easy way and gone for a quick draw, but he said, I'm going to take the more aggressive route. I'm going to keep on to my material, and I think I actually have the possibility to win. Now, in the end, Magnus Carlsen, I think, did enough to kind of go up in material. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to win the game for his sake, but both sides played extremely well. I think Magnus Carlsen recognized that, hey, this 16-year-old kid is legit, but this match been highly anticipated. I really enjoyed covering it. Excited to see more from Eway, both in this tournament and then later on. I think he's going to be doing great things. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this tournament. Hopefully you enjoyed this match. Definitely one of the more exciting ones so far, even if it was a draw. But I'll see you guys in the next round. Thanks for watching.